Well, my global viewers on Global TV, today on this special and exclusive edition, I have with me a very acclaimed defense expert, Brigadier General, retired US Army, States Army, who has been continuously, without any break, have been appearing on multiple international channels like BBC, CNN, Fox, CNBC, getting published on Washington Post, New York Times. He had snatched some time for me, for my global viewers on global TV to discuss about the emerging strategic and military situation in Ukraine. Sir, welcome on the show. You see, now we have almost crossed 1 month into war. Last time when I spoke to you, you had rightly said that nobody knows when Russia will do, and you gave the example of Crimea. Ultimately, it happened, and Vladimir Putin and his army entered inside Ukraine war. They are there for 1 month, and now President Biden, after a lot of diplomatic tussle, economic sanctions, so many things, we are watching it, we are listening it. You see what's happening on the side. Please tell to our global viewers and its implications.
Thank you, Doctor, for bringing me on your show. I don't know how this will end. There will be several endings. Probably few of them happy. They run the range for something totally disastrous to maybe some type of acceptable situation. The bottom line, and since we last spoke about 5 weeks ago, there has been, and on the record, I am someone on the human level, my books show it, that appreciate the Russian people and their culture. But what I believe this regime has done is taking Russia and the Russian people to a level of aggression. And there is no way to say it any other way, despite whatever the justification that the Putin regime has given. On the 24th of February, we had a Poland 1939 style invasion of Ukraine with all kinds of deception and lying leading up to it. And now we are in this, we're all watching horrified as we are seeing a World War II equivalent of a fight, a battle, a desperate fight being fought over the Ukrainian people, cities being razed, civilians being killed. And there's almost now increasingly scorched earth part of it. And I think that we just have to face it. We have to face it that maybe in the beginning, the Russians, I think, showing a lot of arrogance and disdain for the Ukrainians. And I think that also started from the disdain that Putin had for President Volodymyr Zelensky. And boy, was he surprised by that. And then Zelensky and the Ukrainian people rallying in those early days when everybody thought, just how long would it take before Russian spearheads or special operations or spearheads would take Kyiv? And that didn't happen. And they were repulsed, bloodied, and now we have a 1 month stalemate outside Kyiv, where the Russians are bleeding from 1,000 wounds, and while they are smashing and firing their artillery and shooting missiles and all of that, the Ukrainians just get tougher and harder. And we see now the Russian military, and a lot of the guys, the young guys and gals at the lower level, are draftees. They don't want to be in this fight. Their regime told me told us that we're going in to fight Nazis, we're going in to fight fascists. Didn't remind them that Zelensky is Jewish. and now demilitarized. And we're doing it because NATO is a threat to us. And yes, the Russians will play the narrative, of 85 years ago, but the Nazis came through Ukraine and through Belarus and through the Baltics. And NATO with the Americans are the new age Nazis, and they're going to use Ukraine as a springboard. As Putin said himself, if Ukraine goes, we have nothing left to defend, meaning nothing left to defend in front of Moscow, which is absolutely primitive thinking. But he has been able to, with his bodyguard of lies, being able to set up this firewall of disinformation and narrative to put a good percentage of the Russian people in a siege narrative mentality. But what we're seeing is that they are struggling against mostly open societies where we're not perfect,
Right,
but truth rules. And the Russian information firewall is beginning to break. I think we're seeing that. And the news of the horror in Ukraine is beginning to sift out into the Russian population. Though there's a lot of denial this is happening, it's happening. And the longer the Ukrainians hold, and this isn't about the West, or including the US, going to war in Ukraine. We don't want that for all the reasons of potential escalation. Unfortunately, Russians use that nuclear threat as a scorpion's tail to intimidate, but it isn't always going to work. And meanwhile, as the Ukrainians, the cruelest revenge the Ukrainians can inflict on the Russians is just fight and hang on, while the West basically puts Russia into an anaconda grip financially, economically, diplomatically. And this is where I hope India helps. And to basically, I would say, save the Russian people, and in that break the regime, because the only way the Russian people are going to get out of this is this regime has a change of heart or goes away.
Well, rightly said, sir. On one side, world is amassed kind of resistance, and the hidden resistance Ukrainian and Zelensky had shown over the period of 1 month. I mean, even most of the secret guys of the Russia would not have imagined or would have misinformed to Vladimir Putin that they would face such kind of resistance. They would not have imagined that it would take 1 long month to tackle on the Kyiv. Secondly, but Zelensky is a bit disappointed because he's not getting the support he wanted from NATO and United States of America. Now, coming to the point, President Biden is on a very important trip to European countries, Poland, and some of other countries. He's meeting to Ukrainian foreign minister, defense minister. The third part of this is that even Vladimir Putin might be confused at this time as what should be his strategy for tomorrow. He's using hypersonic missiles, he's using nuclear submarines, what he wants and how it all will take shape in coming days.
Well, I mean, there's been so much speculation, and I can only speculate. Remember, he is a creature of the Cold War. He was in East Germany when East Germany reunified, and Germany reunified, and the Berlin Wall fell, and he had to leave his consulate in a hurry. He saw that break. He saw the Warsaw Pact break, and then he was in Leningrad when he saw the Soviet Union collapse exactly 30 years ago, last Christmas. And I believe this is all scar tissue. And then over the 1990s, and that's where I write my book about swimming the Volga, that your listeners can find on Amazon. And it's of this period of optimism, hope, shattered dreams, hijacked economy, the rise of oligarchs, and the disillusionment by the end of the 90s with democracy, free market, free press, and then Vladimir Putin comes to power in 2000, and then we've seen what has happened methodically over the last 22 years. I think he wants to not reconquer all of the Soviet Union, but I think he wants in his mind, the glory and the dominance of the Soviet Union and Imperial Russia before that. It's a mix of both in these lands and territories where Russia once was, Soviet Union once was, and Ukraine is certainly part of that. In fact, there are those that will say, you know, without Ukraine, Russia will be great. With Ukraine, Russia's an empire. Ukraine is 44 million people, a lot of industry, 44 million people, a lot of industry, and geographically, if you read it, you watch it, it sits right between the edge of Eastern Europe, and it is also on the road to Moscow. But he is now desperately afraid, because this is the big threat to him. It's not the US and NATO. And by the way, Ratnesh, I don't want to make this discussion anymore about NATO and the US. This is also about free Europe and independent nations and neutral nations and the European Union and like-minded nations in the world, including, you know, the democracy that you have in India. And so this is not just about NATO and the US, it's Europe. And I want to make that point because Putin and his regime will always say US, NATO is a proxy of the US. Stop. It is being the Secretary General, I remind your listeners, is headed by a very, very strong Norwegian. Okay, and I need to make that point. A tragedy in the geopolitics of the world is that the United Nations, created after World War II, expressly for this type of thing, is increasingly, in my mind, a lot like the League of Nations before World War II. It is great on humanitarian and basic peacekeeping, but toothless in the way it is structured, where in the Security Council, you can get vetoes that stop the overwhelming bulk of nations that voted to condemn Russia for its aggression. And so I really hope the United Nations finds its way, because I'm a big believer in it. And I have to tell you, Doctor, I just have to be open. I have a great appreciation for your country, India. I like its people. I've worked with its people. I want to travel through your country, but I think I and many like-minded nations and people, not just America, were really disappointed that India took could not make a stand with most of the world on condemning Russian aggression. And I do understand India's equities with arms sales, and you do have a decent relationship with Moscow. But no, let me finish. But I just hope that India finds its way, because a lot of us really care for your country and think that that would be the righteous path. And I know that there are other things that kind of make it complicated, China and Pakistan, but I hope India, in my mind, comes out of the dark on this one and takes a righteous stand.
I completely understand the sentiments of yours, public, US public, and I'm quite pleased that you are thinking on the same lines President Biden is thinking. and you understand the complexity what India is having. I want to ask three questions and I want long replies from you. One, Putin says he gives six reasons why he attacked Ukraine. He says Ukraine was about to join NATO. Second, he says Ukraine was about to develop biochemical weapons. Three, he says NATO had surrounded Russian boundaries from all sides. He says America and its friend countries never listened to Putin on the security guarantee issue. This is what Putin is saying, and that is why he said he has a possible threat from his intelligence that Putin could have, that Zelensky could have invaded Russia. So,
All
I'm coming. This is one question.
Okay, first, Zelensky wasn't going to invade Russia. Give me a break. He doesn't have that type of force. And while Ukraine has its own head, he would have been strongly advised by Europe, don't do it. Nobody in NATO, my country, the 30 countries of NATO, the rest of the neutral nations of the European Union wants conflict with Russia, and nobody, I'm emphasized, nobody would have supported a Ukrainian invasion of Russia. They don't have that type of force power. And if you look at NATO along the borders, these are mostly assurance deterrence exercises. These are not the millions of people that you need to do a full invasion of Russia, as occurred in Barbarossa. So Russia, stop with that narrative in my mind. Another one, the bioweapons, vaccines. Ukraine is an agricultural nation, and they were working on things like that. There was nothing. I know my country in my heart would never, especially not even an ally, work with a nation to build bioweapons aimed at Russia. That's BS. Stop. But it's been spun. It's gotten people all upset, and we worry that discussion creates a opening for the Russians to a justification to use chemical weapons in Ukraine, which would be an enormously dangerous step for everybody, and it would show just how out of control and dangerous they are going. Because you go that way, now the whole world, and this is where the United Nations really would have to step up. What do we do? Or do we just stand there and all wring our hands? Oh my God, they've just, dumped chemical weapons into Mariupol to gas the defenders, or something hideous like that. As we saw a variation of that in Syria. So I'm hoping that this discussion about so-called US Ukrainian bioweapons, give me a break. I'm fierce on this issue, and I ask your listeners, for God's sakes, don't believe that. Our allies, do you think that our allies would support something like that? To include, just our NATO allies, including countries like Italy or Brussels or Spain, would support that? No way. Common sense, but it is a justification. All right, I've hit most of your questions. What was the other question you had?
Look, you have answered very clearly, and I'm quite happy that at least for the first time at such senior level, a brigadier general, a retired brigadier general, is giving such a strong reply to Russians. I hope they will listen it if they understand English. My second question coming to you is, we are talking about India. President Biden has shown his disappointment on India's stand. India is part of Quad, and they have signed an agreement on sharing opinion, common stand, common development of issue, common political situation, addressing situations jointly, all that. And very recently, a Quad meeting happened. 2 days back, Chinese premier was here. He wanted to meet Prime Minister of India. He denied, straightforward. He met, however, Foreign Minister and NSA, National Security Advisor. I don't know what was motive of the meeting, but India's foreign minister has clearly replied that India no way wants violence. It is participating in humanitarian exercises in Ukraine. Second thing. Third thing, he said, and it is on record, that we want that violence should be immediately stopped. So we are taking it as official stand of India from the mouth of foreign minister, and it is quoted and recorded in media what he said. So this is what India's stand is. Now tell me, sir, President Biden is in Europe. How you are viewing this entire development?
Yeah, I want to make a point here. And again, I'm one who really appreciates the Indians and would like us even to get closer. But India, I think, was the only, well, yeah, I think India was the only nation in the Quad that did not join in the UN vote to condemn Russia for its aggression. And that just disappointed me. I understand that there are specific interests, and I've just talked to it. But I think in this balancing game, it's not good for the Indian brand internationally to take this hedging position on an aggression that is so monstrous and so big and so, frankly, well covered by world media, including Indian media. I also think that long term, taking a stand against this aggression, and nobody wants to go to war with Russia, and I will emphasize that again. But a stand has to be made, and it has been made very carefully. But what is China taking from all this? And I think that that Xi and Putin talked in generalities about the invasion. Probably, I have no idea. I'll probably not in specifics. And my mind and Xi's mind, okay, do it, but don't get into trouble. Well, Russia has gotten into massive trouble on this, and they've now put Xi and China in a very difficult position, because this is an ugly situation for China or any other nation to support. And now China is having to play a balancing game. And here's the worst thing for China, and I hope is encouraging for your country. And I know you're dealing with some internal governance issues as well, but this seems to be a renewal in a crisis, as we saw at the beginning of the Second World War, of democracies that are pulling together. And this isn't just bad for Russia, this is bad for China and the countries that move into that autocratic or even in Russia's mode, increasingly totalitarian mode. So I think China is probably quite upset with Russia, because Russia's dragged itself into having to take positions, dragged, sadly, your country a little bit into that, against probably your will deep down. So the fact that much of what I call the like-minded world is unified, and we all have differences and we argue, but, I used a phrase, it's an old, as we saw in the Second World War, and India was, hell hath no greater fury than democracy scorned, meaning democracies are all over the place, but once you pull them together, they believe in their belief system. They believe in what they really believe in, where the Russians in their autocracy, and the Chinese probably deep down, a lot of people really don't, especially the Russians.
I want to, you are talking about Second World War, and many of the experts, we have another expert from United States of America, Fiona Hills, she's saying that if NATO and USA will intervene militarily, Russia will embark into a third world war. You are talking about Second World War. India was part of it. It was under British rule at that time.
That's right. You were great in North Africa.
Mahatma Gandhi went to sign an agreement. It was called Round Table Conference in London. He met their the Crown, and he agreed to send Indian army men into the World War. That's history. I understand. I completely understand President Biden wants little more cooperation from Prime Minister Modi. And India and America are closer than ever before this aggression, or as Putin says it, special military operation, whatever it is. Do you think if by any chance, if Russia keeps, it does not stop, we are seeing it, it's been 1 month. If it does not stop for more days, 1 week, 2 weeks, it carries on its military operation, and it's getting hampered in Ukraine. What they were expecting, they are not getting it. What would be the entire scenario? We are seeing huge humanitarian crisis. Millions and millions of people are migrating from Ukraine to Poland and other neighboring countries. Indian students even were stranded, and somehow they were brought back to India. How the United Nations, President Biden is conducting series of meetings, how the world will address this situation.
And Ratnesh, doctor, you mentioned the most important thing. It's how the world, it's not the United States or NATO, it's how the world addresses this. I mean, Russia is pretty isolated. It has a few nations that sort of half-heartedly back it, but do for their own reasons. But they're isolated, and it's going to get worse inside Russia and probably more dangerous. And President Biden and the European leaders, it's not just Biden, it's all the European leaders and NATO and nations in the Quad. This is a global thing. You remember, and there's no structure for it today, but do you remember back in 1950, 51, United Nations early in its life, the intervention in Korea was a United Nations police action. The Russians were asleep at the switch the day the vote was made, and all the international forces that went into Korea, it was under the flag of the United Nations. I think for anything like that, sadly, it's not possible today because of the way of the Security Council. But coalitions today could be NATO, EU nations, like-minded nations, coalitions of the willing, but nobody wants to go to war. Zero wants to fight Russia, and Russia knows that, and that's how it plays its hints of a nuclear card. And what is worrisome for everybody is if the Russian regime starts to really fade, meaning this Ukrainian fight really starts to turn inward, and you've been paying attention to what's going on in Russia inside as well, with their security apparat and their generals. At this point, when does Vladimir Putin start looking over his shoulder all the time, domestically? So we maintain a strong front. We support Ukraine every possible way, weapons, support, moral, as I said. And I think the Russian people increasingly, and we're seeing it, feel that their country, their leadership is taking them into a very dark place. And sadly, that will take time for that realization, because time means a lot more valiant dead Ukrainians, military and civilians, and frankly, young Russian soldiers who had no idea what they are getting into or were. And everything that you're reading and I'm reading, the Russian military is very unhappy right now in Ukraine, and Russian military leadership in Russia increasingly is unhappy by this. To end on this is how this all plays to the regime and the weapons of mass destruction that they have, chemical leading to nuclear, is really the great not fully spoken concern, but we have to face it in some way. Not militarily, but these are the great issues of the time. It's existential for all of us. And I'll end here. It's existential for Ukraine because they're fighting for their life as a nation. Russia doesn't want Ukraine to exist. It's existential. They want their puppet regime. They want it gone. They believe that democracy in Ukraine is a mortal threat to the autocracy and now dictatorship in Moscow. That's, I think, the main reason of the fight now. And we have to do everything to support, and India has to play a balancing game, but a little bit, I think, needs to, in my mind, and I can't tell Indians, to be a little bit more what I believe the right side of the United Nations and history in playing a balancing role, as you've been doing with an aggressor state called the Russian Federation today.
Thank you, Brigadier General Peter B. Zwack. This was a very prominent, celebrated defense and military expert. We are watching him every day since the aggression began on BBC, CNN, Fox TV, CNBC, Washington Post. He has been writing, New York Times. Every day he's appearing on TV with his thought-provoking discussions with celebrated anchors and hosts. Sir, I will end up this discussion with a statement of President George W. Bush, who just said before launching the war on terror operation that we are running out of time. I am sure world will realize it, that world is at this point of time running out of time to save the world, save the humanity. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Dr. Allen, I agree with you. We are running out of time. This is why we all need to pull together even more to face this world, and a lot of good things have happened too, as horrible it's been. Thank you for having me. Thank you to your viewers. God bless, and I hope to visit your great country.
Thank you.